מנדל, אפשר להתחיל?
לא, להמתין.
אוקיי.
עופר זמיר, תפעיל הקלטה בכל מקרה.
אוקיי.
אפשר להתחיל, גדעון.
על איזה קוד?
על אותו קוד, על אותו לינק.
רגע. אני לא רואה שם על הלינק הזה כלום.
לא חושב, אפשר, אני רואה שזה מחובר.
אתה רואה שזה מחובר? אוקיי, בסדר. אפשר להתחיל. כן.
So, just on time, and we'll do it this Friday a little bit different. We are doing a co-meeting with Atlanta, which is in the middle of the night. It's 30 minutes early than a usual Friday, and we'll do everything in English, even the introduction. So good morning to everyone.
Medan, please,
Yeah.
if you and your colleagues need to emphasize on a point in Hebrew.
No, we don't.
And then we can
No,
get back.
okay. We are practicing a foreign language. That's the aviation language. It's okay with us. Don't worry. So for everyone, good morning again. Israelpa is welcoming you for, I think it's the 17th Friday meeting since the coronavirus started to hit us, and since we start hitting back. In Israelpa this week, I think the most profound thing that we did, that we started yesterday morning director's course in the University of Tel Aviv, which was actually a very good meeting, a long meeting, like a seminar, and it was very good. We heard from one of the Israeli Airlines, Israel CEO also, and it was, let's say, I think it will contribute to all of us in order to, let's say, get more involved in a lot of aspects except takeoff and landing, and I think this meeting is all about that. As we put, let's say, our fingers on the situation. So in Israel today, we have more than 3,000 new positive people for the COVID-19 tests. I think that's the highest that we ever had since March. We are joining a lot of countries in the world that are hitting back on the second strike. And we have a little bit less than 1 million people which are unemployed. That's a lot. That's over 20%. We haven't been there for a very long time. We are tracking Boeing and Airbus stocks, and they're both down this weekend. Boeing, which is 168.77, and Airbus is 71.5 euros and going down a little bit. I would like to join today with Jalal Haidar, which join us from Atlanta, and it's the middle of the night. It's 1:30 a.m. Jalal is the managing director of the World Aviation Forum. He will represent himself much better than I will ever can do. Jalal will be, and we hope will be, the manager of ICAO soon. It's an honor for us to talk to you.
Gen, hopefully, if Washington makes the announcement in 2 weeks from now.
Tell us what we can do, and we will do it for you.
Thank you.
So Jalal will speak with us, with Mark Bergman, the council member, and they will both walk us through some geopolitical matters regarding the normalization that we are probably facing pretty soon. This week, 3 Israelpa members with Jalal made actually a unique flight over Saudi Arabia to the Emirates and back with a committee, with Israeli delegation and an American delegation. And from what we have been hearing, they had some, let's say, work meetings. So they actually started working. So we might start seeing the fruit of this normalization pretty soon. We just need to make sure that those fruit are eatable for us and not only look good. So I will stop here now, and I would like to thank you, Jalal, again.
My pleasure, and everybody.
And the stage, the Zoom, the audience, we are all yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is, first of all, good morning again, everybody. I've seen more council members actually now on the screen. First, I would like to thank you, Midan, Captain Zohar, who put us in contact after meeting him a few years ago in Brussels at the European Cockpit Association, as I mentioned earlier. And then I had the pleasure of getting to know you and Captain Bergman and Jaron. I would like to start my remarks by giving you an example that happened and started actually evolving in 2014. Open skies and the liberalization of skies has been both a blessing and a curse. You all have heard or may have heard about, I'm sure that many of you are former military pilots, you know what a dogfight is in the skies. But the real economic dogfight that the world has witnessed since the liberalization of skies and the adoption of a global open sky level and also on the multilateral or regional levels have not been so smooth. You all know Delta, you know American, and you know United. In the US, the three carriers, in addition to Lufthansa and Air France, those five carriers really lead the three alliances of the world airlines. You're part, I mean, I know Jalal is part of the Sky Team. There was a real war, real economic war in the skies. All of a sudden, US carriers and large European carriers found themselves head to head in a very nasty battle over open skies. The first issue that the US and European carriers, and by the way, Singapore Airlines was one of the carriers in Asia that joined the fight with, in my previous capacity as the ICAO representative of the UAE. I started the UAE mission to ICAO. I was involved in those fights between the UAE carriers and other countries, including, and I didn't mention Air Canada, by the way. There was a lot of uproar amongst the US or North American carriers and the European carriers against the UAE carriers. Why? UAE carriers are state-owned. Yes, they are privately held. I mean, they are companies, registered corporations, but they're state-owned, state-supported, and they had a free hand in flying anywhere they wanted. At one time, when United, Delta, and American sat down with the State Department and the DOT in Washington to say, listen, we can't compete against government-owned carriers who don't pay for their fuels, who don't pay taxes, who don't pay air traffic control charges, who don't even pay for their fleet or fleets. We're private carriers, we're not going to be able to compete with them. I'm taking this approach with you folks because I want to share with you real life stories and events and lessons instead of just sharing with you a textbook experience, okay? what went wrong, it was too late. By the time these carriers were complaining about how the Gulf carriers were conquering the skies in North America, in South America, in Australia, just name it. They just built very large fleets. They acquired all kinds of technical support, financial support from the governments, and they hired all kinds of human capital and from all over the world. For example, some carriers in Asia were complaining that they don't have enough technical staff to support their own fleets, their own airlines, because they were going to the Gulf. So the Gulf was siphoning all those resources. So the Gulf carriers, the reason I'm saying this, they had a strategy, and it worked. Not only they approached their bilateral discussions, their multilateral discussions, and their regional discussions, like UAE negotiated the regional agreement with the entire EU, that the European carriers ended up paying for it. So what allowed this? What has allowed this to happen, folks? What allowed it was those governments who were actually negotiating with the UAE were subjected to trade pressure from the UAE and Qatar to allow UAE carriers to fly into any country they wanted to fly into. And that came on the expense of the privately held carriers. I discussed this with you in more details earlier this morning or yesterday, my time, Mark, as you recall. So what happened, it was too late. It was too late by the time those US carriers and the European carriers started complaining to the DOT in Washington, to the State Department in Washington, D.C., both government agencies who are really in charge of aviation policy, mainly the State Department, not really the DOT. FAA doesn't do a whole lot because FAA is a technical body, as you know. I would put it this way, instead of sharing too many details that, I mean, this subject can take hours and hours to be discussed, but I want to give you the meat. I want to give you some suggestions and some ideas that you can share with your government to avoid the pitfalls that the US government and other governments in Europe fell in with the Gulf carriers. One tactic or one approach the UAE and Qatar used in Europe, in the US, in Australia. When I say the US, I say North America, Mexico, Canada, and the United States. Trade pressure, trade tactic pressure was put on the other negotiating partners to allow Etihad and Emirates Airlines to fly freely into the US. Okay? So what allowed or what caused this to happen? ALPA, when ALPA started complaining on behalf of their US airlines to the US government, ALPA realized that they were not even part of those negotiations. What you need to do, as I told Captain Bergman earlier today, you need to make it clear to your government, to the Prime Minister's office, listen, you want to go negotiate an air service agreement? Fine, that's your job, Mr. Government, but we want to be represented, okay? Again, I hope I'm not being very graphic, but I'm sharing with you things that I have done in those situations. I'll give you an example, folks, which I also shared with Mark earlier. When I was the representative of the UAE on the Council of ICAO, I was also the vice president of the Council of ICAO. I was asked by Etihad Airways and by Emirates Airlines to put UAE pressure on the Canadian government to allow Etihad to fly 7 weekly flights to Toronto, and Emirates 7 weekly flights to Toronto. Now, if you take 14 777s, some of you flew the 777. The Emirates configuration, the average Emirates configuration on a 777-300 is about 320 passengers, times 14. Okay? Weekly flights in each way. The numbers are not there. There aren't enough Canadians who need to fly to Abu Dhabi and Dubai every week, filling up those aircraft. Because some of the air service agreements also include the number of seats an air carrier can fill in. So the Canadians said, no, we're not going to allow you to come in and eat Air Canada alive. So while UAE was successful in the US, they were not successful in Canada. So I was sitting one day with the chief air negotiator of Canada, and I said, Raj, why don't you want to allow our carriers to come into Toronto? He said, why do you need 14 flights a week? I mean, he made sense. I couldn't argue with him. And then I said, well, we just want to develop our air traffic capacity with you, and we want to enhance or develop further our aviation relations. When you have more passengers, you have more activities, you have more business, you have more tourism. Of course, that was a losing argument. It wasn't really a good argument. After like 5 or 6 meetings with this chief air negotiator, my boss at the time, who was the Minister of Economy in the UAE, and also he was the chairman of the board of the General Civil Aviation Authority, he said, I want to meet with these people. After the meeting, he said to me, whoa, we have become arrogant, haven't we? I mean, why do we need 14 flights into Toronto? He said, can you please go back to Abu Dhabi and Dubai and say that? Because I have said that. Don't get me wrong, I like the UAE. I like them a lot. And I salute their step forward to normalize relations with the State of Israel. I want to see this with the rest of them. So, and I'm really, I respect the UAE model. With this said, the Canadians stood firm and said no to the UAE. The US did not. When American, Delta, and United put a lot of pressure on Washington, D.C. to stop Etihad, Qatar Airways, and Emirates Airlines from serving new destinations in the US, Secretary Kerry said, I was in one of those meetings. He said, no, we have no time now to discuss aviation relations. We don't want to upset our overall relations because of aviation. You guys are losing money. Keep losing it. If you get in trouble, we'll try to help you. Of course, this didn't fly until Rex Tillerson came into power with President Trump. He made some changes. He was active on this front. He took a different approach. He started with Qatar. He told Qatar, listen, you need to change your aviation behaviors in the US markets and in our skies. So the Qataris joined One World, and they started working closer with American Airlines. That didn't happen with Emirates or with Etihad and the rest of the US carriers. I will keep saying this, folks. If you want to prevent your passengers to be taken from your airports or passengers flown via your own airports, an act that will actually cost you to lose passenger and cause you to lose passengers, if you know what I'm trying to say, okay? You need to start with your government. You need to tell the government, we have to have a level field air transport agreement with the UAE. Negotiating the right agreement is the only way to stop losing passengers or making your skies open as the UAE was successful to open the skies in North America and Europe. Okay? How do you do this? You really need to understand all the elements of an air transport agreement negotiations. And that is by adhering strictly to the 9 freedoms of the air. Mark, I sent you a copy of those, right? Is Mark hearing me?
Yes, he's hearing you, and we all got it.
Yes,
Okay.
we have a copy. I have a copy of that, and we have other copies as well.
Yeah, you can share. So I want to give you another example. Make sure that when the negotiations start taking place, do not allow anyone to accept any trade tactics or trade pressure from any partner, not just UAE, from any country. I think I used the Tokyo example when Etihad and Emirates Airlines demanded equal number of flights out of Narita Airport. The Japanese said, no, we can't give you equal rights because you are 2 airlines coming from one country, 2 neighboring cities next to each other. Why do you need 10 cargo flights and 10 passenger flights into Narita for each one of you? The objective was to dump capacity in Asia to really impact other traffic patterns between Singapore, Japan, China. I mean, it was the issue was beyond Japan. And the UAE had a very large interest in cargo traffic to Japan from the UAE. Okay? When the Japanese said, no, we're not going to give you 20 flights a week. We may give you some from Narita and some from Haneda. The chief air negotiator from Abu Dhabi Air Transport stood in the meeting and said, if you don't give us what we want, we're going back and you will have less buildings to be lit because we're not going to give you enough oil to light your buildings. I'm using this example because it is illegal to use trade tactics and threats to obtain more traffic rights, okay, into a certain country. The UAE may wanted 20 flights into Japan, but the objective was not only Japan, it goes beyond Japan, okay? So, folks, keep this very critical element. Do not allow trade tactics or any other political objective or any other tool for political convenience, because when politicians sit down and negotiate air transport agreements, they tend to give away a lot of things, unless they have aviation professionals sitting with them to tell them, you cannot do this. Yes, you can do this. We want to be consulted on the final product. We want to see the draft of the air transport agreement before you initial it or sign off on it. Always, please don't do what ALPA did. By the time ALPA realized the threat that was going to hurt many jobs, whether pilots or other cabin crew members or other ground staff, it was too late for ALPA to play a major role in combating what the UAE or the Gulf carriers were getting and obtaining. Frankly speaking, I mean, if you have a negotiating team from the State Department and the DOT trying to negotiate an agreement with Germany, let's say, okay, they're not going to look after the best interests of the carriers first. First, they're going to look at the overall bilateral relations between the US and Germany. I'm just using those 2 countries as an example. And the practice in US negotiations of air travel, services agreements, the aviation folks sit in the back of the room while the politicians sit and negotiate agreements. And that's not a good thing. So make sure you have a seat, you have a chair, you have a position during those negotiation sessions. There's something else that may not help you and may work further against the interests of your carriers, and that is the fact that Abu Dhabi is a U.S. Customs clearance airport, if you know what I mean. Passengers who want to fly to the U.S. can fly to Abu Dhabi from neighboring airports, and then they clear U.S. Customs and immigration at Abu Dhabi Airport. How many of you are aware of this fact?
I think most of us don't. And if I can interrupt you for only a few seconds, I think, as you said, it's much more than aviation. It's all about trade, taxes, and stuff like that. But I would like to let you continue and let the other council members to ask questions. That's their part. I think that, Jalal, if I can only say one thing, is as we've been talking that Air France is flying from Paris to Dubai once a day, and they're flying 3 or 4 times each carrier once a day. It goes along with owning Paris Saint-Germain football club and a lot of hotels and stuff like that. I'm sure that we will have things like that in Israel too, and that will put, it's not a question for me, and it will put some trade pressure. And we all know the arguments that these carriers are lowering the prices for the people, and people would like that, and people like to fly pretty cheap in the most, let's say, the newest aircraft in the shortest route that can be done. And these guys, they have it all. So our goal now, and the really challenge is to get into the room. It's not that simple.
Dan, you used a word that triggered another thought in my mind, which we have argued many times in meetings with other nations. At one time, I had to answer questions to the EU, to the Commission, regarding Emirates Airlines and Etihad in Europe. This is what I was told. I was told, don't tell us that you guys are not supporting your carriers financially. Don't tell us that you're not paying for the fuel bills. Don't tell us that you're not paying for the salaries of the expats. Okay? So you have an automatic disadvantage right away. Okay? Because your government is not as generous with you as the UAE government is generous with their airlines. Because they own them. I mean, who owns the carriers? The royal families in both Abu Dhabi and Dubai.
Yes, but Jalal, there is one thing that I think you have to consider, because I think Israel is unique, because, you know, we are facing, let's say, the UAE are state-owned. The Turkish airlines and stuff are state-owned. The Russians are state-owned. The Ukrainian are state-owned. The Indian are half state-owned. The Ethiopian are state-owned. And let's say the Chinese are not private. So right. We are on a football field with ballet shoes, and we have to strike. We will do it, but you have to understand, Israel is a little bit different than the US. It's a little bit different than Canada, and that's one of the reasons that I guess next week or the week after, we will finally we'll be able to create the Israeli political lobby for Israel aviation, so they can get us into the room. But I don't want to interfere.
No, I understand. The example I was going to give, Medan, what is the objective of the Gulf carriers? All three of them. Is it to carry passengers from point A to point B? It's not.
No.
It's not. You have hotels that you need to keep busy. You have tourist destinations that you have to get customers into. You have real estate that you have to sell. So the U.S. airline, the UAE Airlines and Qatar were being used, in particular in the UAE, as tools to promote economic growth in the UAE. I respect that if that's what they want to do, but that is not the norm in international air transport, because the principles of international air transport under the Chicago Convention is to safely fly passengers from point A to point B. Okay? This is where the problem is. And this is what you can use as a starting point. Okay? If you use this argument, the UAE will have a lot of difficult questions to answer. Okay? Because the way the Gulf aviation works is not really in accordance with any of the trade or many of the trade or aviation economics agreements. Okay? What I'm trying to say here, there's a reason why we call these bilateral meetings as aeropolitical meetings and affairs. Because what happens, politics overcome aviation interests of one state. You will have, in bilateral agreements, you have to have two sides having a balanced relationship. That is the purpose or the objective of a bilateral agreement. Okay? That is no longer the case. What is happening, one side is gaining over the other, meaning that one side had given concessions or more concessions to the other side. For what reasons? Historically speaking, political, economics, and security. John Kerry said this statement. He made a famous statement. He said, United, Delta, and American, get lost. We don't have time for your games now. We have more interests in the Gulf over airlines. I'm sharing this with you for a reason. Okay? Being in that part of the world, you, again, have to be aware of these things. Why? Because you need to have equal, level playing grounds with your new partner. It does not hurt to say, look, we're a small country, we have small airlines, we don't have the fleet of aircraft that you have, we don't have the support that you have, therefore, we want to fight for our traffic rights, we want to make sure that our passengers are not being taken away from us. I can use more graphic examples, but I have to stay political and I have to stay polite, if I may. What I'm saying is, you have a very, very formidable competitor. Peace is great. I love it. I cannot be happier, personally. But you need also to have a peaceful aviation afterwards. Okay?
That is so true. I would like to hand on the control of the meeting to Captain Bergman, and I might have to leave you now, but I will definitely speak to you later on your day. Jalal, for the time being, I would like to thank you so much. This is really enlightening for us. We will definitely, next week, we'll update you and invite you. Next week, Friday, is 9/11. And
yes,
we will speak with ALPA USA on the 9/11. regarding to 9/11 and regarding to Alpha and the Gulf. So we will be very happy to send you that. It won't be in the middle of the night, Atlanta. I think it will be something around the morning. So I'll hand it out to Mark, and thank you so much. It's appreciated, and
Pleasure. I hope I was able to share things that are meaningful to you.
You definitely did, and I truly believe that this is only the beginning. So
Good.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Good luck to all of you. I know you're all pilots. Safe flying, folks. Be safe.
We will continue.
We're not ending the meeting.
We'll continue the meeting. Mark will take it from here.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Maidan. I'd like to open the floor to some questions. Ronnie Zor has a question. So if you can release the microphone for Ronnie, please.
Good morning, folks. First, hi, Jalal. I'm glad you're here with us.
Hi, Ronnie.
We know many years, and I do appreciate our friendship. I want to tell our audience that you are not only an expert in aviation, you are a great advocate of peace between countries and peace between people. I don't know if everybody knows, but you are from Lebanon and you're from Seoul, which is actually a neighbor. So I think we got a good explanation for what you're speaking about this week when UAE approached Saudi Arabia with a request to grant a permission for flights to come inbound and outbound from Israel, but only to the UAE, which serves their needs and not our needs. And because their need is to take the sixth freedom, come to Tel Aviv and take our people to the UAE and then make it an hub and continue all over the world. But for us, for Israel, the most important thing is to fly over Saudi Arabia and to fly to Bangkok, India, or whatever in the East. So what they did right now is they can take people to Bangkok, for example, which is a very important destination for us. They can take people faster and cheaper than us. They can make an intermediate landing and take people and arrive Bangkok before we arrive because we fly all over around the world. I wanted to know, first of all, does this meet international standards and maybe the Chicago Convention and other treaties to let one country fly over another country, but the other country to fly only to this destination? And I think it's also a good example how the UAE take care of their trade demands or aviation demands in this situation and not ours. And they take the lead in this situation today.
I can assure you you're raising a very good scenario. This is how the Gulf states work. In the UAE, Mark, we discussed this morning earlier, my time.
Mm-hmm.
You have the General Civil Aviation Authority, which is the federal aviation regulator in the UAE. Then you have the Dubai Civil Aviation Authority. And then you have the Abu Dhabi Department of Transport. Dubai and Abu Dhabi transport arms are much, much more powerful than the GCAA. The way they negotiate their agreements, the GCAA heads a delegation, and that's what's going to happen in your case when you negotiate with them either there or in Israel. The GCAA, which is the federal agency, has no control over anything, nothing. I can assure you this. Whatever the GCAA says is fed, spoon-fed by Dubai and Abu Dhabi to serve the needs of Emirates and Etihad. That's a very important point, folks, to keep in mind, okay, when you negotiate. Back to Ronnie's original question, this is what is wrong today with the Chicago Convention, and this is what's wrong with some of the freedoms of the air, especially 5, 6, and 7. 5, 6, and 7 use the 7th freedom of the air and the 8th freedom of the air and the 9th freedom of the air as a conduit to do exactly what Ronnie Zohar was talking about. I'm a country A, okay? I may not give you the 8th freedom of the air or the 9th freedom of the air. That doesn't happen. But the minute I give you the 6th freedom of the air and the 5th and the 7th, actually, okay, you have a conduit to the rest of them, and that's what allows a carrier to fly from point A to point B, drop passengers, the plane passengers in point B, then fly from B to C carrying passengers from B, dropping them off in C, and go to D. That's what you were saying, Ronnie, okay? And this is what caused or ignited a fight between the UAE, Emirates Airlines, and Qantas in the past, until a political decision was made in Canberra, okay? And a new agreement was negotiated between the UAE and Australia that put both carriers, Qantas and Emirates, on the same level. What happened in the process? Emirates Airlines bought parts of Qantas privately, quietly, and nobody knew about. Why? Because the UAE was investing in other areas in Australia. Again, we're going back to trade issues. So the example that Ronnie Zohar used is accurate, and that is what is wrong with those freedoms of the air. Why do these things happen? Because it's quite often when air negotiators go to negotiate an agreement, they may not have, or they don't have enough expertise on their teams to negotiate the right agreement. What the UAE does, the UAE hires the sharpest negotiators in international air transport, and they use them. On a typical negotiations team in the UAE, you'll find Indians, Brits, and US nationals, and sometimes South Africans. Okay, I know that, Mark, you're South African. So, but they use a lot of expertise. It's all non-UAE expertise. Okay? So, I hope I answered you, Ronnie. So, the loopholes are in the freedoms of the air. When you're giving, when your country gives the freedom, you're giving the rest of them in the process.
Yes, but this time what they are doing is they negotiated Saudi Arabia not to allow us to fly over Saudi unless we are flying to the UAE, which is not equal.
Yes.
Okay? It's a little different from the freedom of the air. It's traffic rights over Saudi.
Well, I'm going to take you a step further, Ronnie. I'm not sure if you're aware. There is a big fight between UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Qatar over air traffic control management in the Gulf. Okay? This started way before the blockade against Qatar. The four countries are fighting on who's going to control air traffic management. There have been some ideas to create Gulf control, just like Eurocontrol. All right? The Saudis want to control it. The UAE wants to control it. Bahrain wants to control it. Qatar wants to control it. The Kuwait has said, leave us alone. We're not interested. Oman said, leave us alone. Okay? So you may look at this as something that has to do with the new aviation relations between the UAE and your country, but it has deeper roots. It has to do over the control of Gulf airspace. And folks, most of you or all of you are pilots. Many accidents and incidents that happened in Gulf airspace have not been reported. The skies are not very safe there. There's a huge volume of military traffic in that airspace, as you very well know. Okay? Or you may know, I'm assuming that you know. So the behaviors of Saudi Arabia may not be necessarily related to the latest bilaterals or actually relations normalization between the UAE and your country.
Okay, thank you. Jalal, you mentioned the 5th, 6th, and 7th agreements, freedoms. Do we have any examples? One freedom that we are very concerned about is the 5th, which is the right to take passengers to fly from, say, Dubai to Tel Aviv and take passengers from Tel Aviv westwards to Europe and the US. Do we have examples of a 5th agreement being used or abused by the UAE?
Let me give you a good question, Mark. Let me give you an example. If Israel and the UAE will agree to the 5th freedom of the air as one of the elements of a new air service agreement. The air service agreement is actually a bilateral agreement. That's the a common name for it. Let me ask you this. You're raising a great question, Mark. If you both agree to exchanging a balanced 5th freedom of the air, who's going to be the beneficiary?
Quite obvious.
Who?
The Emirates.
Yes, why?
Well, they have the capacity. They can dump seat capacity, and they're government funded.
And they have airplanes. They have large fleets.
That's right.
You answered me. Great answer. They have the power and the resources to have a much bigger capacity, even when you don't need the capacity. They have large fleets, and they don't have to worry about fuel bills or salaries in many cases. They don't pay taxes. Okay? So, yes. So this leads me to say, before you agree to the 5th freedom of the air, or the 7th, guys, you should never touch it. 7th is cabotage. Mm-hmm. This would just really hurt you. It will hurt an airline or airlines the size of your airlines in your country. Okay? What the 7th freedom of the air will do, it's going to give the UAE carriers a carte blanche at your airports and in your airspace. You don't need that. You can't afford it, actually. Okay? Do not agree to a 5th freedom unless it's a conditional 5th freedom. There have been cases where conditional 5th freedom of the air agreements or clauses have been reached. Meaning, how do you stop the UAE from unfairly competing against you with their outstanding capacity? Simple. You limit the number of seats to be flown into your country, okay? And if they're going to use your airspace or your airports for cabotage or 5th freedom purposes, you have to become their partner. This is when you enter a new dimension, okay, in the relationship by requesting a certain load or certain capacity of their aircraft to be commercially divided. In other words, you become eligible for some of the revenue that they make. Okay? So, again, another very good question, Mark. The fifth of freedom of the air is great. It's a good thing. But unless you have equal resources, it will become costly to you and it will happen on your expense.
Okay, clear. Thanks very much on that. Amos Aldag has a question. If you can release his microphone, please.
Hello, Jalal.
Hi. Hello.
It's a pleasure to hear you. It's music to our ears to hear such an expert. We've been debating these issues for a long time, and now to hear them from your mouth, from someone with such an experience and expertise, it's really music to our ears. I want to ask you something regarding the really in ICAO and its role and its ability to enforce anything. It has to do with, we'll start with the Chicago Convention and then amendments of the Chicago Convention agreements as to what is fair competition, where it's portrayed as a level playing field by ICAO. Now, we all know that in delicate words, that's BS.
Yes.
There is really no fair competition in the world to start with. As you mentioned in the beginning of your talk, any government-owned airline, that goes through the window immediately. Now, after COVID, we get such imbalances, huge, tremendous imbalances by government support to different airlines, where all of this is really a farce. So here's my question. My question is this really just are these really blank words? Is this ever going to be enforced internationally by some kind of trade regulations, international trade regulations, or by ICAO? I'm not familiar if ICAO is just standard setter or it has any power to enforce anything.
Repeat your name, please.
Amos.
Amos, I am delighted you've raised this question. It's going to take me a while to answer you, because I'd like to give you some examples here. The international aviation system is broken. What is it? Broken. If you want to know good examples, I can use some safety related or aircraft disappearance or security incidents to prove that the international aviation system is broken. Amos, the international regulatory oversight system is broken. Economically, safety-wise, security is very political. It's somehow left intact because it is a painful issue. Take the 737 MAX. Take Malaysians, both, the two Malaysian aircraft, the disappearance and also the shooting down of Malaysian 777s over the Ukraine. All those incidents prove that the international regulatory system is broken. And it's also broken because, as you properly and correctly and accurately stated in the beginning of your remarks, competition is a joke. We heard Midan mentioning and naming how many how many carriers are owned and supported by their governments. Take Turkish. If you think that Emirates is a threat, watch Turkish. Okay?
We know Turkish is a threat. It's killing us here.
So they're killing a lot of others. So the fact that the international aviation system is broken, and mainly because ICAO has become a weak body. I'm not sure how many of you read my 737 statement to Congress, the 737 MAX. I sent it to Midan. And I've used actual examples, graphic examples of what is this broken international aviation system causing economically and safety-wise, okay? Just take the fight over environmental and emission issues. The international aviation system has become crippled, and COVID-19 is like the unexpected storm that dropped the fig leaf down. Okay? Here's how we describe ICAO in private circles. ICAO is a necessary body. At the end of the day, it's a United Nations body ran by a council of 39 countries. There used to be 36, it's now 39. Folks, if you're going to rely on ICAO right now, don't. Let me tell you why. There are council members in ICAO who don't know the difference between a Greyhound bus and an Airbus. I'm serious. I mean, I was one of them, and I will not badmouth anyone. Why is ICAO weak? Why can't ICAO control? Why can't ICAO carry the spirit of the Chicago Convention in real life? Because ICAO is managed by these 39 countries who are not really aviation experts or have no knowledge of aviation or do what serves their own personal interests. ICAO is three bodies, three chambers. You have the Air Navigation Commission, you have the Council, and you have the Secretariat. The Council has managed to suck out all the blood of the Secretariat for nonsense. I mean, the things they ask the Secretariat to do every day has nothing to do in delivering the mission of ICAO to its member states to address something that you just brought up, Amos. Okay? So, don't count on ICAO. Don't. Until ICAO is reformed, and that's why President Trump decided to freeze the US government financial contribution to ICAO back in November. And the EU is very close to do the same thing. The organization has not carried or fulfilled its mission and obligations towards the Chicago Convention that created that body. Because ICAO, as a secretariat, is the organizational child of the convention. And I think it's at its 20% capacity of what it should be. With the importance of your question, Amos, there are many calls right now, many calls, to re-examine the role of ICAO in a post-COVID-19 era. There are many calls to look into IATA's future. Although I would take IATA every day over ICAO when it comes to functionality and performance. Although now I'm going to be a candidate to become the Secretary General of ICAO. But one of my mandates is to reform the organization. How easy is it to reform a UN agency when you don't have the charter that you need? Okay? So, and I understand that this is a closed meeting for members of the association. I happen to be a mentor of the current Secretary General, Dr. Feng Liu. Okay? She is a Chinese national. She is an expert on aviation economics. She negotiated many of her country's air service agreements to the point where our US regulators told me she is a very impressive lady. But when she became the Sec Gen of ICAO, she was crippled. She couldn't even hire the people that she wanted to hire. So the body, ICAO, is a very troubled body right now that needs to be reformed. Until then, don't count too much on ICAO, Amos, because many of the resolutions that ICAO makes, they will not be heard or even implemented.
Okay, thank you for that, Jalal. One last question. Danielle Roberts from CAL, Israel's cargo airline.
Thank you. Good morning, and a very insightful discussion. I'm not much of a question, but more of I'd like to hear a little bit of an insight regarding the cargo world, if you have any in such cases. I mean, I heard that case study that you were referring to in regards to the Japanese, which was very interesting. But I'd like to hear if there's anything else that maybe you could shed some light also on the cargo world. I mean, I'll be honest with you, hearing all this, I'm trying to stay very optimistic. And it sounds like we're really caught between a rock and a hard place. Because if, you involve politics, and we know there's going to be many aspects involved in this, and you're going to have possibly even situations where the United States, especially in an electoral year, is going to put certain pressure on the state of Israel, on its politicians, to just get the job done, sign these agreements, and we'll deal with the little details later.
I like your question. I do. What you need to do, you need to tell your government and the US government to go after UPS, after FedEx, after Amazon, after Atlas. The cargo industry has changed. The landscape is totally different right now. There's no more flying tigers. There's no more seaboard world. It changed fundamentally, right? You need to have those carriers bring in more hubs to the region. You need to tell them Dubai is not the only place where you have to have a hub. Does that make any sense to you? Then
yes,
you need to work on your industries, to use your own carriers. Why does every cargo operator want to go and operate out of Dubai? This is a question.
I suppose because of its location.
No. How far is Dubai from Tel Aviv when it comes to flying into other locations? I understand the Asian formula or factor. Dubai gives a lot of freebies. Not anymore. Those were like promotional things that Dubai gave, okay, to new operators, to new owners or owners of new warehouses. You need to expand your outreach network. You need to put pressure on these cargo, mainly on couriers like FedEx and UPS. Why would someone like UPS and FedEx, the two largest competitors in the business of carrying courier cargo, have hubs in Dubai? Why? I mean, they can go to Bahrain, right? Beirut, before the place was blown up, since 1975, was home for the second largest cargo carrier in the world. Trans-Mediterranean Airways was the second largest after Flying Tigers. It is the facilities that the governments in those countries are selling. Frankly, you need to do a better sales job. Cargo is the future too. Cargo will save you from hemorrhaging money. Did I answer your question?
Yes. Thank you very much.
You need to have really a very powerful sales drive.
Okay, Jalal, thank you very, very much. This has
You're
been
welcome.
A very interesting and educating discussion and talk. Also, our talk earlier this morning, your time. I think I have a feeling that we'll be in touch a lot more in the future, and we'd like to use any help that you can provide us with, as you mentioned earlier this morning. I think that you have fueled our expectations or our concerns regarding the UAE, which we've been discussing during the last few weeks. And the big challenge we have right now is how do we get to government in time? Maybe we've missed the boat already or missed the train already, and have some influence at this time while the negotiations are going on, and not only afterwards once we see the agreements.
I'll make one quick remark. Don't focus your attention in the UAE on the GCAA. The GCAA has zero power. Try to reach independently, okay, and unilaterally to the Abu Dhabi Department of Transport. I'll give you some names, okay, Mark?
Mm-hmm.
And try to reach to a certain individual in the Dubai Civil Aviation Authority. Those are the decision makers. They call the shots on behalf of Emirates and Etihad. If you go through the GCAA, you'll be spinning your wheels until you have no wheels left.
Okay.
I'll share with you some names and phone numbers. And folks, I do want to apologize if I was not very coherent. I have been... I've had an eye injury that has deprived me from my sleep pattern. In an hour and 26 minutes or 23 minutes from now, I would have had only 4 hours of sleep in 48 hours. I hope I was okay.
You were wonderful. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll speak
All
soon.
the best to you. Safe flying and be safe.
Thank you. Take care and be well.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.